is a noble right, and I want novelty. I don't want only basic rights.
Okay, I'm going to take a question from the lady in the third row. Yes, you. Yeah. You have your hand up.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Basma Abdul Ghaffar. I'm from the Qatar Faculty of Islamic Studies. I just want to say that education is counterproductive without freedom of speech, because what we're doing is producing generations of individuals that are reinforcing the conditions for their oppression. No mother looks at her child and says, I want to put them in an education system that is going to reinforce the conditions of their poverty.
Okay, Kevin Watkins, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I think we're in a little bit of danger of getting stuck in trench warfare here. The truth is, generations, before you spoke about social justice, social movements have fought for generations for this idea of universal human rights. You know, the idea that you have a right not to be enslaved, you have a right to a decent education, you have a right to the freedom of speech, and you should defend that right at all costs.
Okay,
now,
I want to hear back from the speaker in a second. So.
But how are we going to do any of that if we can't speak to begin with? I teach, and my students look at me at the end of the semester like, what are we going to do? What do you mean, what are you going to do? They just don't get it. They don't get that they are allowed to speak, and they're allowed to be critical, and they're allowed to write to newspapers, and they're allowed to say, we don't agree with what's happening, and we're going to keep talking, and we're going to keep acting till something changes. Otherwise, I'm simply graduating people that are going to reinforce the conditions that they hate. And that's not going to get us anywhere. I think that's counterproductive.
So your students are free to say whatever they want?
Yes, and I'm free to say whatever I want in my classroom.
Dennis Hayes, you want to say something?
What we have now is an argument that used to be used for slaves, right? When your lot gets better, right, we'll look after you more. The best thing you can do is speak up wherever you are. It used to be the case that if you were fighting against any form of oppression, you did it by speaking up and fighting and arguing and actively organising against it. Now, everybody in authority tells you, wait. Wait till sometime in the future. Be happy slaves. Right? Whether you're a slave, you're earning enough money, you're on a training course to be an engineer, whatever, don't bother thinking. Don't bother fighting your oppression wherever you are. Don't bother arguing with people in Africa who are rulers who don't even believe in AIDS. Don't take any arguments about GM crops and say, we're not eating them, we'd rather starve to death, because you're not having the arguments. It used to be the fundamental condition that the fight for equality, human dignity, was premised on the freedom of speech, that you had to argue for it. That is why this motion is so important, because we've lost, or people in power have lost the idea that freedom of speech is important. And what they've lost, really, and you ought to remember this, they've lost faith in you. They've lost faith in human beings, wherever they are. And I do find it really patronising. You can say whatever you like about anybody in another country, and they can argue back with you. That should always be the way it is. If you say something critical about them, they can argue back. But you should not be told you're not allowed to say that.
Okay, I'm going to take a question from the lady right at the back. Yes, you. Yeah.
Good evening. I'm actually a teacher.
Where are you from?
Mauritius. I consider myself an educator. And before coming to this debate, in our classroom, we discussed with our students the meaning of freedom of speech. And we discouraged them, funnily enough, from trying to find a definition in a dictionary, because we really wanted them to understand about freedom of speech. So my question is, how can you understand about freedom of speech if you have no education?
You've answered your own question, right? And it is a difficult issue to say what freedom of speech means today. And I do think the only way you do it is by debating it. You exercise your freedom of speech to understand it. Because so often, people in British universities will talk about having a safe space in which they can express themselves without anybody being offended. That's not freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is your right to say to other people, I disagree with you, and I'm going to reason and argue with you till I change your mind. That is what free speech is about.
Yes, but you're missing the point. If you have no education, how can you question anything? How can you develop any critical thinking? So if you're saying that education is worthless without freedom of speech, then it's going to be a very, very sad world that we live in.
Look, you are responding to our question. What have you done with your students? You decided not to give the answer, to let them discuss.
I agree with you, but this is not the motion. The motion is education is worthless without freedom of speech. You did not define what education is.
No, but the point is the quality of the education is exactly this. Your education has a value because you give them the space to speak. If you were to give them the answer, it wouldn't be education. It would be just to give them the right thinking and then you have to repeat. This is not what you are doing.
Okay, Nagla.
Two things very quickly. Dennis keeps undermining the value of training that gets people a job. Why do we undermine that? This is very important in reality in people who can hardly meet their basic needs. My second point is, if we assume that people who are given an education that is not ideal, that is not critical, we are really putting very little faith in their capacity, their intellect to question. We are assuming that people will sit and listen and will be driven like sheep. You talk about having faith in the intellect of students. If you do have faith, then accept, not try to change, but given the reality, whatever education they will get, they will be smart enough to question it.
Well, we have lost
it's not an ideal scenario, but it is still not zero.
Okay, we'd like to go on much longer, but we're running out of time. I'm going to ask each of the panelists for one sentence, 15 seconds, summing up their views before we get to vote on the motion. Dennis, would you like to start? 15 seconds, no more.
Education is about your right to make up your own mind. If you vote against this motion, you're voting against yourself and your own ability to make up your own mind. So we want 100% vote for the motion.
Tariq Ramadan.
Yes, I think it's a very important motion. We can play with words and say, okay, the motion is about worthless or not. This is not the point. The point is about the quality of education, and this education should have objectives, and the objectives is freedom of speech and to challenge the system and the opinions of the people.
Kevin Watkins.
Well, you vote against the motion and you vote for us. You get two things in one. You get everything they're asking for, which is freedom of speech, 100% commitment to critical thinking in education.
Okay.
But you get one additional thing.
No,
you don't get to violate.
You don't get an additional sentence. Nagla Rizk.
The motion is not about the quality of education. The motion is very clear about the worthlessness of education in the absence of freedom of expression. Defending freedom of expression does not mean that you vote for the motion.
Okay.
Especially voting
one
against
sentence,
the
that's
motion
it.
is not voting against freedom of expression.
That's it. Thank you. We've come to the point where we're going to vote on the motion. This House believes education is worthless without freedom of speech. Would you please take your voting machines? Let me just explain to you. If you want to vote for the motion, that's the side represented by those on my right. It's button 1, the yes button. If you want to vote against the motion, that's the side represented by those on my left. It's button 2, the no button. Whichever button you want to press, please do it now. All right, there it is. 53% for the motion, 47% against. The motion has been carried. All that remains for me to do is to thank our distinguished speakers. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to you, the audience, as well, for your participation. The Doha debates will be back again next month. Till then, from all of us on the team, have a safe journey home. Good night. Thank you very much indeed. Good night.